Hey there, it's Dr. Jennifer Stoll from Cimarron Global Solutions, and I'm back with another deep dive into some of the data from our 2025 National Benchmark Study on resident sentiment towards sporting events. And you're probably well aware that we did this study with our friends over at Longwoods International. We dove into all kinds of stuff. Well, not all of it could make the report. So we've split off some deep dives in different sections of our report information that couldn't make it into the full report. It's right here on the bottom left-hand corner, some stuff about travel patterns by generation and by region. We're going to keep doing that, but I wanted to veer off just a hair on this one because we got to ask some really cool questions about myriad things that are topics in the sport and tourism industry that either we're not talking a lot about or maybe we're not even asking about in the first place to be well informed. And one of those topics that we included in the study was resident perceptions of cheating and corruption in sporting events. Now, I'm going to flip over to this, but before I do, you're probably saying, Stoll, this doesn't have anything to do with sport and tourism. How is this useful for me? I encourage you and I challenge you to stay with me for a couple of minutes here because I think what we stumbled into is actually extremely relevant for not only the sport industry, but the sport and tourism industry. And it has implications for you and your destination, for your events as well. So here we go. All right. Well, I didn't want to spoil anything. So what you're looking at right now is a blank chart with no data on it whatsoever. And what we asked was, tell us your level of agreement that cheating and corruption are prevalent in sporting events. So again, we're asking, do you think this is a thing or is this not a thing? What we did is we rolled up everybody who thinks it's a thing. They either agreed or strongly agreed. And the results that I'm about to show you will probably surprise you just like they did me. And we did this by a generational perspective. So we wanted to take a look at, how does that differ based upon how old you are? And I'm going to turn on the first layer of data and we're going to look at boomers. And boomers are folks between 60 and 78 years old right now. And we can see when we ask them whether their level of agreement, whether they think cheating and corruption is prevalent in sporting events, nearly 1/3 of them agreed or strongly agreed. So, in other words, they're saying, yeah, we think this is a problem in sporting events. Let's keep going one layer deeper. When we look at Gen X, and Gen X is our 44 to 59-year-olds right now, their level of agreement was even higher, almost 40%. Take it one step further. Let's turn on millennials. Millennials, ages 28 to 43 right now, 51%. So they eclipsed over half of respondents to our survey, either agreed or strongly agreed that cheating and corruption is prevalent. Not does it occur, but is it prevalent? So think widespread, problematic in sporting events. Let's go to Gen Z because this is really telling. 55%. So well over half of our respondents of Gen Zs, that's 18 to 27-year-olds. Keep in mind, we only surveyed adults in our study, believe that cheating and corruption is prevalent in sporting events. So basically what this chart is showing me is the older you are, the less you think it's prevalent, but the younger you are, the more prevalent you believe cheating and corruption in sporting events is. And this was just absolutely stunning to me. If somebody would have asked me when we started this survey what I thought the generational responses would have been, I would have said maybe a peak at a 20 or 25%. But as you can see, even the lowest at boomers is above a third of respondents. And it really got me thinking, why is this? Why is it that people, one, think there's a lot of cheating and corruption in sport, or at least at such a high rate, and two, the younger the generation, the higher that number is. So it made me think about all the legalization of sports wagering that's occurred in our country over the last several years. So I did a little bit of looking on that, and I broke down their support of legalized sports wagering along the same generational lines. And what we see here is the older population, those 60 plus, those boomers, right here in the orange, they actually have less support for legalized sports wagering in their state. It increases with Gen X up to 60%, millennials, the highest, up to 71% support for legalization of sports wagering in their state. And then I thought it was really interesting that Gen Z's tailed back just a little bit at just over 60%. Now, some research I did, because I'm not an expert in sports wagering, but I just found it very interesting that these were the results. So I wanted to see, well, who's actually wagering? And some of the data that I found cited that those that are betting on sports, more than two-thirds of them, so over 66%, are really in this millennial and Gen X category. These categories right here in the middle, which coincidentally have some of the highest support, undoubtedly, for legalization of sports betting. But what's interesting to me is maybe the Gen Zs haven't quite moved into that category yet. Some of the younger ones, maybe they don't have the disposable income to start sports wagering, but they do seem to support it, at least more than half do. But what does this mean for us if we take a step back holistically? Well, I think there's a parallel between the sports wagering propensity and the, let's just say, a little bit of skepticism when it comes to sport integrity, as demonstrated by our question on the prevalence of cheating and corruption. Maybe there's a chance that increased exposure to betting in the younger generations, particularly in those millennials, um, could also raise awareness of risk, right? And that just makes logical sense. The more money that's involved in something, the more apt it could be for corruption or cheating. Now, boomers across the board have a lower wagering support and a lower trust in that integrity of sport, shown in our last question. But what I'm most keenly aware of here is that there seems to be a generational gap emerging between those skeptical bettors and the trusting non-participants in sports wagering. And I just wonder if that might parallel what we're seeing over here when it comes to the perception, at least, that cheating and corruption is prevalent in sporting events. And you might just be like, okay, Stoll, you outlined all that. What does that mean for me in the sport industry, in the sport and tourism industry? And in my humble estimation, it really boils down to three things. And these are the three things over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, I don't care what generation you are or whether or not you are actively participating in sports wagering, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that any perceived cheating and corruption harms sports' overall health. I have to remind us that we are an industry built on the core business unit of sporting events. And anything that would chip away or deteriorate the efficacy and, frankly, the ethical practice and integrity of those sporting events could be cause for harm to our overall industry. Now, secondly, I think that this data actually underscores some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of uh, catalyst for shifts across all sporting event tiers and our industry. As we build and build and build, more states are coming online with sports wagering. We're seeing more dollars. We've talked extensively about the hyper commercialization of youth sports, and now we're seeing that happen in collegiate sports with name, image, and likeness, the house settlement, how all that's going to shake out. We've already seen it international sport down the line. And I'm of the belief that these are the things that are providing not just a chance of a shaking and a breaking, quite honestly, to occur in our industry, but I believe that we're starting to see those things occur already. And this would just be added fuel to the fire, if you will. Now, what does it mean for us as boots on the ground, as a sport and tourism practitioners? Well, really, my focus for this is on the younger generations, the millennials aging up, the Gen Zs, and then the generations to follow. Because we've got to remember, boomers and Gen Xers, they're slowly aging out of our industry from the standpoint of whether it's participation or fandom, spectatorship, attendance, travel patterns. They're going to be aging out of our core demographic focus area, and these younger generations are coming into them. So when we look at things such as participation rates, such as the number of kids people are having, such as their perception of cheating and corruption, even prevalency in sport. Those are things that tell me that we may have some concerns in the future for the long-term sustainability of the industry. Now, am I saying sound the five alarm fire sirens? I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that more and more of these things are mounting up, and I believe that it's just adding pressure to our industry. Our industry's long-term sustainability, whether it be through integrity of sport, through participation, through even the perceived positive outcomes that we talked about in other places throughout the study, are dependent on support from the younger generation. So watching their consumer behavior patterns and trends is going to be essential going forward for the sport and tourism industries. So a little bit different flavor today. Dive in here, take a look. But I think these are the things that we've got to be paying attention to, we've got to be asking about, and we've got to be discussing in our industry so that we're not caught in our heels. We can be proactive in addressing some of these things going forward. Now, we're going to continue to dive into the travel stuff and the interesting nuances like this into the future. So stay with us, check out more on our site. And as always, thank you to our partners at Miles Partnership for presenting, for being the title sponsor of our study, as well as Visit Frisco and Greater Orlando Sports Commission. There's much more where this came from. If you've got some interesting things that you'd like to hear us report on, just shoot me a note and let me know, and we'll be glad to dive into them. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jennifer Stoll from Cimarron Global Solutions. Have a great day.